Now, we've been in this teaching series, 5 Ways to Wreck Your Life. This is the 5th and the final installment of this series. And what we've been doing is exploring the writings of the wisest man who ever lived. His name is King Solomon. King Solomon wrote 3 books of wisdom that are in the Old Testament of the Bible. The one that we've been focused on specifically here is called the book of Ecclesiastes. And the Ecclesiastes is somewhat of a personal journal for King Solomon. You know, he had led the nation of Israel during the mid-900s BC. He had been a very successful king. He had led Israel at the pinnacle of its existence as a nation. It was the envy of all other nations. But now as Solomon is an old man, and he's looking back on his life, he's preparing to leave his earthly life and to leave all of his wealth and his possessions and his kingdom to his heirs, to his successors. He's looking back and he's basically evaluating the way that he spent his life. And we can see clearly as we read the book of Ecclesiastes that he doesn't have a very high opinion of himself and the way that he spent his life. In fact, as we read it, we see that he's very repentant about the way that he spent his life. He expresses all kinds of regret and all kinds of shame. He looks at his life and essentially says, I think I wasted it. I think I wasted all that God gave me. God gave me great wisdom. God gave me great wealth. God gave me great power. And I think I've wasted it. He wasted the prime years of his life. In fact, you might go so far as to say he did more than waste the prime years of his life. He made a complete mess. He wrecked the prime years of his life. And so he writes for us the words in Ecclesiastes, which God has preserved now for 3,000 years, as if to say, hey, listen to what I have to say. Read it and take it to heart. If you want to live a better life than I lived, if you want to avoid the mistakes, the pitfalls, the life-wrecking adventures that I went on, you're going to have to choose a different path. You're going to have to choose a different road. If you follow in my footsteps, you will most certainly wreck your life. And Solomon highlights for us several very specific areas that he wished that he could have a do-over in. The first of which is that he teaches us that if you want to wreck your life, then you should let pleasure drive you. If you want to wreck your life, let pleasure drive you. Let your feet hit the floor every morning and let your number one goal in life be to have fun, to live on easy street, to make everything about you and your own personal experience, making it as great as possible. Let the theme song of your life be the song of self-satisfaction, fun and pleasure and leisure. Eat, drink, be merry. Let the pursuit of happiness be your God. You do that, and you will most certainly wreck your life. And that for a season is exactly what King Solomon did. Instead of allowing his life and the pleasure that he experienced in life revolve around his own personal relationship with God, he chose to let the pursuit of pleasure be the thing that everything in his life revolved around. He was the wealthiest man alive. He could have whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and yet this is what he had to say about it. Everything I wanted, I took. I never said no to myself. I gave in to every impulse. I held nothing back. I sucked the marrow of pleasure out of every task, my reward to myself for a hard day's work. Then I took a good look at everything I'd done, looked at all the sweat and hard work, but when I looked, I saw nothing but smoke. Smoke and spitting into the wind. There was nothing to any of it. Nothing. See, what Solomon learned, and what hopefully we have learned as well in the process of studying his writings here, is that when our happiness is tethered to something that's temporary, then our happiness will always be temporary. When our happiness is tethered to temporary things, then our happiness will always be temporary. It's like the smoke that rises from a fire. The smoke is there, but it doesn't last forever. It doesn't matter how big the fire is and how much smoke it puts out. Smoke will eventually dissipate. It will eventually be gone. And so upon realizing that a life filled with pleasure wasn't going to fill the emptiness, the void that Solomon was experiencing in his life, he turned to his own kingdom-building enterprises. He says, if I can't find what I'm looking for in pleasure, then I'll just be consumed with success. That was the second thing that he tried. He did this, but he warns us that this is another surefire way of wrecking our lives. Center your life around titles and trophies. Climb the ladder of success. Step on whoever you need to step on to get another rung up. Don't ever settle with what you have when there's something else that you can attain. That's another surefire way of wrecking your life. Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes 4, he says, I observe that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is meaningless, like chasing the wind. The great comparison trap, this competitive spirit that we have, is one of these things that drives us. Most of us will spend a good part of our lives comparing our lives to other people around us, whether it's family or colleagues, co-workers, neighbors. We will spend a good part of our lives comparing who we are, what we have, and our life experiences to other people's. And if we ever get the inkling that somebody else has something better than we do or experiencing life in a better way, then we take it upon ourselves to see if we can one-up it. We spend our entire lives trying to keep up with the Joneses, but we don't really want to keep up with the Joneses. We want to better the Joneses, right? We want to get one step ahead. We spend our lives on this hamster wheel, running and running and running, trying to attain something bigger, better than what everybody else seems to have. And yet Solomon tells us that it's like chasing the wind. You can never really catch the wind. And even if you did, what have you got when you've caught it? In the third week of the series, we heard Solomon tell us that another surefire way to wreck your life is to isolate yourself. Simply create a moat around the castle that is your life. Put on a great suit of armor and don't let anybody else in. Don't let anyone see the real you. Make sure that your Facebook status and your Twitter feed is always full of the highlight reel of your life. Don't let anybody see what's really going on behind the scenes. Don't ever let anybody know what you're really struggling with or what you really might need help or assistance with. But God said it's not good for man to be alone. We are designed for company, for community, for relationships. It's part of the way that God designed us. People need people. Adam had God in the Garden of Eden. Adam had all the animals. Adam had the greatest existence that we could possibly imagine, except the one thing that God identified very quickly that he needed, that he didn't have in his life, was another person. People need people. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 4 that 2 people are better off than 1, for they can help each other succeed. 3 are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Surround yourself with people in your life who will pick up your mat and carry you when you can't pick yourself up. When you're down and out, you need to be surrounded by people who are willing to grab the corners, pick you up, and carry you where you need to go. You need to surround yourself, surround your life with people who are on the road that you know you need to be traveling. People who will help influence you to make the right choices, the right decisions, to stay on the right road. Surround yourself with people who will carry you where you need to be. You know, having those people in your life doesn't mean that you won't have struggles. It doesn't mean that you won't go through tough times. But having another monkey in your cage can certainly help you deal with the stress a whole lot more than you can on your own. Last week we looked at what Solomon told us about how we can wreck our lives if we reject wisdom. Tim taught us that wisdom is like a guardrail on a windy, dangerous road. And as long as we stay between the guardrails, we're good. We don't want to hit the guardrail. We don't want to go over the guardrail. We don't want to do anything except for stay in the middle of the road. But the moment that we choose to ignore the guardrails, the boundaries, the limitations in life, when we put our foot on the gas and we begin to drive recklessly, ignoring wisdom that shows us the right way to travel, then we set ourselves up for catastrophe. We're going to go over the guardrail. We're going to go over the guardrail and off the side of the cliff, and we're going to make a mess of our lives. And more often than not, we're going to take others with us in the process. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 13 that if you walk with the wise, you'll become wise. But associate with fools, and you'll get in trouble. Again, we need to surround ourselves with people who are on the road that we need to be on, people who can carry us where we need to go, people who can speak wisdom into our lives and help us establish the boundaries and the guardrails that we need. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, Solomon writes that a wise person chooses the right road. A fool takes the wrong road. The irony of this entire study and this entire book of Ecclesiastes is that Solomon had all the wisdom that he needed at the beginning of his life to avoid all the pitfalls that he fell into. Just because you have the wisdom doesn't mean that you will necessarily not make mistakes. Solomon failed to stay between the guardrails. He went over a number of cliffs in his life. And now as we read this book, we come to the end here, we see that up to this point, everything that Solomon has written is filled with regret. It's drenched with regret and sorrow for the way that he's lived his life. He's so sorry for how he spent his time on earth. In spite of all of his success and all of his wisdom and all of his wealth, he clearly feels that he wasted his life. And so in one last-ditch effort, he pens this book for us, this memoir that basically says, look, you can save yourself a whole lot of time and a whole lot of trouble and a whole lot of heartache if you'll just heed the advice, heed the wisdom that I give you. Let this be the guardrail in your life. He says, don't wait until you're an old man like me to discover what I've discovered. You can start to live a new life and a better life now. Learn from my mistakes. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the last chapter of the book, he begins at verse 1 by saying, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach, when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. He's saying, don't let your memoir be filled with the same regrets and the same shame that mine is filled with. You can choose to live a better story while you're still 13 and you're discovering new smells that come from your body and you're trying to manage that pimple farm on your forehead. Make the right choice now. Get on the right road. While you're still a teenager, you're in high school, you're learning how to drive. Choose the right road. Even though everyone else around you may be choosing the reckless road, they may be driving with abandon, you can choose the right road now. In your youth, remember your Creator. Choose the road that leads to God while you're still a young adult, while you're still trying to figure out how to do this job that you spent all those years in college or university training to do. While you're still a newlywed and you're trying to figure out how to live with this person that 6 months ago you were enamored with, but who now is quietly driving you nuts. While you're still learning how to change those diapers and figure out how those little wipey things are supposed to get all that nuclear poop out of the crack. How does that work? While you've still got elementary school kids at home and you're able to help your third grader with their math homework, even though you have no idea how to do the new math. While your mind is still sharp and your dreams are still clear, choose the road that leads to God. Honor your Creator. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Listen, most of you are younger than I am. But there will come a day that you'll be my age. I'll be well past you at that point. But your body is going to start to break down. And your mind is not always going to be so clear. You know, a lot of people will choose to live a life gone wild now and assume that there will be more time for God later. I just want to sow my wild oats and I want to do what I need to do to live and experience life now. There will be time for God later. But listen, you will save yourself so much heartache and so much regret, as Solomon points out to us, if you will tap into who God has made you to be today. Don't wait. Don't wait to the end of your life. Don't wait to make Him the center of your life. Let His wisdom guide you now. Let God define success for you. Let Him help you establish the guardrails that will keep you from wrecking your life. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Life is so brief. It is so short. Writers of the Bible say that it's like a vapor or a breath. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. Isn't it so true? Because you know what, when you're a tween, all you can think about is becoming a teen, because when you're a tween, being a teen means that life is going to be so much better. And when you're a teen, all you can think about is getting out of the house and becoming a 20-something, because when you're a 20-something, everything in life is going to be so much better. Then you're going to get to your 30s, and you're going to start looking back on your 20s and wonder where that decade went, and you're going to be longing to be a teen again. And then it gets 40, 50, 60, then you can't even remember your teens. Right? Life is so fast. You know, I'm not some old wise sage. For some of you, I know I'm old. But if there's one thing that I've learned in my life is that time passes so quickly. It seems like it was just a few years ago that I was celebrating my 30th birthday. And in just a couple of years, I have my 30th high school reunion coming up. How is that possible? How can I be so old that all my friends on Facebook are posting pictures of their grandchildren? This shouldn't be happening. Life passes so quickly. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with the classic Billy Crystal movie, City Slickers. There's a scene in the film where the character that Billy Crystal plays, his name is Mitch, he's invited by his son to his school elementary class, and it's career day. And so, you know, all the dads, the firefighters, and the NASA astronauts, and the policemen, they come and they share with the elementary class about how their jobs, and everybody oohs and ahs because everybody wants to be an astronaut and everybody wants to be a firefighter. But Mitch, His job isn't quite so glamorous. He works for a radio station, and no, he's not a DJ. He sells advertising. In essence, he sells air. And as he stands before this class of elementary students, he realizes that his life hasn't really turned out the way that he had hoped it turned out. And so he takes a moment to teach these elementary school kids how to carpe diem, how to seize the day. He tells them what they need to do to enjoy their life and to live life while they still have their youth. Take a look at this.
Value this time in your life, kids. Because this is the time in your life when you still have your choices. And it goes by so fast. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30s, you raise your family, you make a little money, and you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly, you grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud. One of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery. You'll call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you'll have a major surgery. The music is still loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anyway. The 70s, you and the wife retire to Fort Lauderdale. Start eating dinner at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have lunch around 10, breakfast the night before. Spend most of your time wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt and muttering, how come the kids don't call? How come the kids don't call? The 80s, you'll have a major stroke. You end up babbling to some Jamaican nurse who your wife can't stand, but who you call mama. Any questions?
The only reason that's funny is because so much of it is true. Some of you have experienced some of that. Some of you have had a procedure or two, right? I don't think any of you have a Jamaican nurse you call mama. Not yet, anyway. But it's funny because it's true. We all know that there is some truth in that we're headed down that road. There's another old guy that wrote some smart stuff in the Bible. You might have heard of him. His name is Moses. And Moses wrote this prayer, which is recorded in Psalm 90. Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. Think about that for just a second. Just our ability to grasp just how short our lives are is a guardrail for us. It actually gives us some clarity and some direction on how we need to live the life that God has given us. You know, we continue to read Solomon's exposition here, and his exposition is going to sound a little bit like Billy Crystal's there, only it's a bit more eloquent. And he gives us some counsel that if we really embrace this, it can completely change the course of our lives. He continues in chapter 12, verse 2, with remember your Creator before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds remain after the rain. He's saying there's going to come a day when things aren't so bright for you, when your future is not so bright. There are going to be some days when the things that you start to go through are going to be very trying, very challenging. And there are going to come some times in your life as you look ahead when your mind is not going to be so clear. You won't always have the presence of mind that you have today. It actually reminds me a bit of my grandmother who in her 90s had to be moved out of her home, the home that she'd lived in for more than 60 years, into a permanent care facility, assisted living. Oh, she was mad. She did not want to go, but she just reached a place where she was just too frail and her mind wasn't all clear, and so she was having a tough time, so she had to be moved into this care facility. Now, my grandmother, Lily, she was stubborn and she was ornery. And the interesting thing was that they were giving her medication that was making her a little bit more lucid, and when she was lucid and she knew where she was just mad. She didn't want to be there. She was fighting mad. When she wasn't on her meds, she was a little loopy and she had no idea what was going on. But she would spend her days sitting on a chair in the front lobby of this care facility watching the front door. It was a locked front door. People had to be buzzed in and buzzed out. It was secure. But she was like a cat waiting for that door to get open so she could get out. And on more than one occasion, she found a group of people making their way to the exit. And she got up out of her chair. I'd like to think it was probably like a little Mr. Bean act, and she made her way into the middle of the group. And she made her way right out the front door with everybody else. Now, because her mind wasn't so clear, she didn't have a plan for what she was going to do once she got outside the front door. I guess she figured she was going to go home, but home was more than 30 miles away. She'd long since lost her driver's license, didn't have a car, didn't know how to hotwire one even if she could drive. So she walked, and she walked, and she walked until she couldn't walk anymore, and she sat down in someone's front yard. And by the grace of God, somebody came along and saw her sitting there and got her back to where she needed to be without being harmed or hurt in any way. You know, as a family, we got a bit of a chuckle out of it because we saw that even at 92 years old, Lily was still as ornery and stubborn as ever, but at the same time, it was a little bit scary. It's scary to watch someone that you know and someone that you love get to a place where they're just not fully aware of everything that's going on, and we all started to say, hey, you know what? There's a very good chance that we'll all be in the same place someday. Solomon continues in verse 3, chapter 12, and he says, remember your Creator when the keepers of your house tremble. That's your legs, the keepers of your house. It's what holds you up, right? Your legs are going to start to go. He says, and strong men stoop. Why do strong men stoop in their old age? Because their back gets weak. They're no longer as strong. You know, I threw my back out a few years ago picking up a slinky off the shelf at the dollar store. I am not lying to you. This was a post-40 incident. Silas and I were in the dollar store walking down the aisle, and I went, oh, look, a slink. Silas, go get a cart. Go get a cart. He looks at me like, what? Just go get a cart. So I stood there in the aisle frozen until he got me a cart. Then I dropped the slinky, and I pushed my way out to the parking lot, and I somehow managed to get in the car and drive myself home and then laid on the floor in my living room for 2 days. A slinky. Remember your Creator before the strong men begin to stoop. He says, remember your Creator before the grinders cease because they are few. Grinders. That's your teeth, right? Because eventually they're going to all fall out of your head. You don't believe me? Get this. I was having a little pain in my tooth a few months ago, and I went to the dentist thinking, oh, I must have a cavity. I go to the dentist, she does an x-ray. No, there's no cavity, but you've got a tooth that actually has 2 cracks in it, one going this way and one going that way. Well, what do? There's nothing we really can do because eventually the tooth is basically going to disintegrate and fall out of your mouth. Great. She said, we'll deal with it after that happens. All right. So, for the last 3 months, I've been chewing on the other side of my mouth so as not to break this tooth. And you know what happened a few weeks ago? I broke a tooth on the other side of my mouth. My teeth are literally falling out of my head. Remember your Creator before those looking through the windows grow dim. Remember your Creator before your arms are too short to read the back of a can of soup. Verse 4, he says, remember your Creator when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. He's saying before life's opportunities are shut, before all the doors are closed to you, while you're still able to work hard, while you're still at the peak of productivity, remember your Creator. Remember your Creator when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. He's talking about sleeping and getting up in the morning here. Now, I'm not much of a sleeper-inner, but once upon a time, I could sleep in. How many of you like to sleep in? How many of you can like sleep in on a Saturday like noon or later? All the young people. Yes, all you young people. I've got a family and a wife who can sleep and sleep. Now, when I was in college, I could sleep till like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No problem. Nowadays, I go to bed at 10 o'clock, and I can't sleep past 2 a.m. because I got to get up and go pee. And then I do it again at 4 a.m., and then I do it again at about 5:15 a.m. Some of you are laughing because you think it's funny. Some of you are laughing because you're in the same boat. I don't know what it is. You turn 40, and suddenly your kidneys are somehow able to make urine out of nothing through the middle of the night. How is it possible that I have to pee 4 times in the middle of the night? I don't know. He says, remember your Creator when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. Why are their songs growing faint in the morning? Because you can't hear anymore. Because your hearing is starting to go. He says, remember Him now. Remember your Creator now while you still love rock climbing and roller coasters or bungee jumping or skydiving, because there is a day coming when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets. You've probably seen it, maybe with a grandparent or a great-grandparent, that as they get older, they start to get paranoid. They get scared, right? I was speaking to a lady in our community group this week whose grandmother has just been moved into a home, and she should be in a home, but she's actually in her own home, and she's afraid. She's terrified to be at home alone. Because in your old age, you realize that you don't have the same control that you once did. You don't have all of your faculties about you, and it can get scary. He says, remember your Creator before the almond tree blossoms. That's before all the hair on your head turns white. Or in the case of Ted, ash blonde. Okay? He says, remember your Creator before desire no longer is stirred. I'll let you figure that one out. The grasshopper drags itself along. That's before you have to use the walker or the little cart at Walmart, the scooter, right? While you can still get around. Remember your Creator before people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. Remember Him before your own funeral. Remember your Creator. Please, Solomon pleads, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Now this word that Solomon uses here, remember, it means more than just to reflect upon or think about or have some recollection of. The actual Hebrew word infers that there's an action on our part, a decisive action. And if I'm reading Solomon's words correctly and I understand the point of what he's trying to make, the decisive action that he is imploring us to take is to repent. To repent means to change your mind or change your direction. Solomon is telling us that while you're still young, you need to get off the wrong road and you need to get on to the right road. The wise person chooses the right road. Exercise wisdom now. The right road leads us to hope and to peace and to a fulfilled life, an abundant life that'll exceed our wildest imagination. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm no longer in the days of my youth. Maybe I'm not so young anymore. Maybe I'm on the downhill side of things. Or maybe you're thinking, you know what? I've driven over so many guardrails and gone off so many cliffs that my life is a write-off. I've got no hope. There's no hope for me. I told you in the first week of this series that I'm a firm believer in second chances. I believe that the Bible is a book about second chances and third chances and fourth chances and so on. And what I want to hold on to and what I want you to hold on to is this. Is that as long as your heart is still beating and there's breath in your lungs, it is never too late to get off the wrong road. It is never too late for redemption. It is never too late for you to get off the wrong road and to get onto the right road. There's an old Chinese saying, proverb that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is right now. It is never too late to get off the wrong road. And so, as we wrap things up here today, I want to give you an opportunity to change roads if that's what you need to do. Maybe for some of you, it's just a matter of getting back onto the road that you know you need to be on. You know, after you've traveled on a road pursuing God for some time, it can be really easy to lose place of where we are on the road map. And when we stop and we take a good hard look, sometimes we realize that we're not headed in the direction that we need to be headed. And so sometimes we need to repent again. We need to change directions again. It needs to be something that we do on a daily basis, reevaluating where we are. We've made Jesus our North Star, and we're supposed to be pursuing Him, but we can so easily get distracted from that and find ourselves on the wrong road. Have you ever thought about why a baby cries when a baby cries? Like, this to me is one of the most remarkable and amazing things in the way that God has made us. If you think about this, somehow a baby that knows absolutely nothing about the world, right, has no real conscious idea of how humanity works and how relationships work, somehow knows that if there's something wrong and I make enough noise, that there's someone out there bigger and better and more capable than I am of solving my problem, right? If I just make enough noise, then they'll come and feed me. Someone. If I just make enough noise, they'll come and change me. If I just make enough noise, they'll come and hold me close and keep me warm. And you know, as we watch the dependence that a baby has on its parents, You know, one of the first things that we begin to celebrate as a child grows is independence, right? As that baby gets older and begins to be able to do those things for himself, to feed himself, or to put on his own clothes. Eventually, you pray that they're potty trained and they can change themselves, right? And we celebrate that. I remember my son Silas, when he was like 2 or 3 years old, we'd go to help him put on his shoes before we'd leave the house. And he would say, "My do it, my do it." And you're like, proud of my son. He's so independent. He's so self-determined. And as our child grows and we grow into being adults, we celebrate self-sufficiency and independence. It's what our culture breeds. The problem with this is that we begin to shut out our dependence and our need for God in our lives. We live in a culture that is so focused on independence and self-sufficiency that we can forget that we need God. And you might have noticed when you came in today that the message title today was Be God. We saw that in the opening bumper, and it's on the front of your bulletin. Now, nobody gets up in the morning and says, "Oh, I'm going to be God today." But what happens is, by very nature of the way that we're raised and by very nature of the culture that we live in, we adapt this lifestyle that causes us to focus so much on our own dependency, self-dependency, and our own independence. And so we lose track of the fact that we need God. We lose track of the fact that most of the cry of our heart is a cry for somebody who's bigger and better and stronger and more capable than we are to come and do the things for us that we can't do. And there is someone out there who can do that. His name is Jesus. And what he wants from us more than anything else is our dependence. He wants us to trust in him. He wants us to depend on him. It's not that there aren't certain things that we need to be able to do for ourselves in our lives, but when it really comes down to living a life that's full of hope, a life that's full of joy, a life that's full of fulfillment, it comes from being dependent on him. Yet, because of the way that we choose to live our lives, we're often way off the mark. We're way off that road. In Proverbs chapter 3, Solomon says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he'll show you which path to take." So we struggle sometimes with knowing which road in life we're supposed to take. But Solomon tells us that the wise thing for us to do is just depend on God, and he'll show us which road is the right road. The biggest problem that most of us face is that outside of everything else, we have this fault that's hardwired into us that causes us to constantly choose the wrong road. We constantly do stuff that we shouldn't do. We're constantly doing things that we know are not in our best interest, and it's not in God's best laid plans for us. Jesus refers to this stuff as sin, this condition, this problem that we have as sin, and that sin separates us from having a relationship with God. It's like big piles. I kind of think about it in this analogy, if this works for you. The city is building these berms down in the flats, right down at Lions Park and Strathcona Island Park, and there are these giant piles of dirt. I had a first-hand look at these piles of dirt being constructed this summer as our baseball teams were practicing down there, and this is what strikes me. Is that most of us would probably agree that those berms are supposed to be a good thing. They're supposed to protect us from the floodwaters that rise from the South Saskatchewan. But most of us would also agree that those giant piles of dirt have completely wrecked our parks. They've made our beautiful parks look ugly. These berms have caused these ancient trees to be uprooted and tons of wildlife to be displaced. I remember when Elizabeth and I first came to visit Medicine Hat, the first thing we said is, "Man, the parks are so beautiful." But now you drive down there and you go, what has happened? These big piles of dirt have ruined everything.